In 2005, I was offered another job at the University of London, where I am currently. And since then, I've worked with a number in addition to teaching about puppetry and Indonesia, and Southeast Asia more generally, with students from all over the world who come at the PhD and the MA level to study with me at Royal Holloway. I've also worked with a number of gamelan groups around the country as a dialogue. And I've played with, at Royal Holloway we have a gamelan in residence, Puloganti, which is run by a visiting lecturer named Simon Cook, which I've played with and done wayang and other dramatic work with. And also I've played with Simon Cook's other ensemble, Sakarengal, which is based at, the instruments are based at City University. It's a community group. And I continue to work with Gamelan Group not only in the UK but elsewhere. I'll be off in Canada next month performing with Gamelan Madusari. Of course, I return to Indonesia regularly and work with gamelan there. I was in Malaysia and did some work with a number of gamelan in Malaysia also, playing music as well as doing wayang with all of them.
So, from what I heard, you are more a dalang person rather than a musician.
Yeah, I mean I do play gamelan, but yeah, I am primarily a dalang, a puppeteer. Of course, the dalang and the gamelan are inseparable. The whole raison d'etre, perhaps, of gamelan is to accompany wayang. The musical structures are based on wayang. Instrumentation is devised to accompany wayang. In many ways, that these are absolutely inseparable, and it's unusual actually. I mean, the way the gamelan was exported is kind of unusual, that it's seen only as a musical ensemble, but in Java itself, it exists to accompany dance, accompany wayang performances.
And you are an international dalang.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Sure.
So, you are performing in Indonesia as well as outside Indonesia.
Yes.
Can you tell me about your experience performing in Indonesia and also outside? Is it different?
Yeah, there are many differences, of course. There are great pleasures attached to both opportunities. That here in the UK, it's an opportunity often to introduce a new art form to people who are likely to be completely unfamiliar with it. They might have seen some version of wayang from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, but they're very unlikely to actually have seen wayang kulit as a performing art form, and the stories which go along with it, which are just amazing stories. And so it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce traditional wayang here. And I've been doing also a lot of contemporary work here. That the UK, as you know, allows for opportunities to do things which are unusual, and the support of work which is novel, and the kind of inquiry around the art form and its nature is really exciting. So that makes it very interesting performing here. On the downside, there's a lot of organizational work which is attached to being a dalang in this country, where in Indonesia I can more or less just show up and do a performance. All the the puppets, the gamelan, the izin pentas, the permission to do the show, all the logistics are taken care of. And here, every gig involves an enormous amount of planning, coordination. A lot of logistical work has to go into performing. And as a full-time lecturer, I don't have time often to chase gigs. So when things come my way, sometimes I'll accommodate them. If they're very complicated, I might pass on them. And that's happened a number of times.
You need a secretary.
Yeah, I'm not at that level, I guess, that I don't have quite enough gigs to have a secretary. But I also don't have enough time to really pursue very actively all the approaches which are made to me. If it involves too much administrative time, I'll either refuse it, or I won't pursue it systematically. So it means that I don't do a lot of performing in the country as a result, unlike some other professional puppeteers who are dedicated entirely to performing, will pursue performances in schools and in community settings and theaters. That my performances here are mostly collaborations with existing gamelan who will invite me to perform for various reasons, or I'll invite for if I'm asked. Yeah.
When you are performing in Indonesia, what language did you use?
No, Javanese. Yeah. And I perform in Cirebon. I perform in Cirebon Javanese. And occasionally I perform still in Jogja and Solo and in Central Java. And I'll use a mixture of languages typically. A little bit of Indonesian, a little bit of Javanese, a little bit of English. But in rural Java, I perform in pretty classical Cirebon Javanese.
How did they take it afterward? You know, what sort of comments did you get from the audience after you were performing in Indonesia?
You know, this is interesting that I have a metaphor for this, which I just learned yesterday. The French sociologist Desarteau talks about people being tenants of culture, that we live in culture for a period of time. And I think that's very much my attitude to Wayang in Java, that I'm a tenant in this culture of Wayang. And I'm accepted in that way as a tenant, and that I can perform these lakon in the way that they are performed by other dalang. And it doesn't really matter, in fact, who makes the sacred water, who excises the spirits, who tells these stories, as long as the stories are told, and for the right occasion, the right stories enacted, the right kind of social relations are set up in the performance between the audience members and the sponsor community and the story which is being told. In fact, one of the best comments I've ever received as a dalang was from a fan of Ki Basari, who was one of the great dalang of Cirebon of the 20th century. Somebody I apprenticed for. I did his Wayang Awan, or his afternoon shows, which is how one apprentices. So a senior dalang will do the nighttime shows, and during the daytime there will be matinee shows, which will be performed kind of by an understudy. So I was working in that capacity for him as his understudy. And one of the best comments that anyone ever made was he had listened to the Wayang from afar, as one often does, because Wayang is a very oral art form, and had heard my voice. And when he came up to the screen, he expressed surprise, not to me, but to Basari, who was sitting on the stage. He said, "I heard the Wayang going on, and I thought it was you who was performing." And so this is one of the best things that anyone has ever said to me, about me as a performer. He wasn't saying it to me directly, and this is somebody who really knew my boss's style, and thought that I was him. So that's a wonderful thing, and it's a dalang who I really admire and has been a huge influence on Wayang more generally. So yeah.
Wow, that's really good. And what about outside Indonesia? How did they take it?
How do they take?
Yeah. What sort of comments did you get after the show?
In the UK or
in the UK or anywhere else outside Indonesia?
Yeah, no, different kinds of relations. So, for example, in Malaysia, where I've done a little bit of work with the migrant Javanese community of the south of Malaysia, in Johor, where there's a very large community of Javanese migrants, and they're delighted by what they call there an orang putih, a white person, performing Javanese arts. They see as a huge endorsement of their ethnicity and their identity, because of the old colonial relations, which in some extent are more present in Malaysia perhaps than they are in Indonesia. In this country, I think generally people are really interested in the arts. I don't know if people would want to go to performance every week, but certainly when I did this series at the British Library in 2008 with the South Bank Gamelan players, which was a 12-hour Ramayana series over 4 nights, there were people who were coming back night after night to follow the story and to keep track of where the characters were. And I think people are generally, really interested at that level, and are excited to see, things performed in English. And many of the people who came to the British Library said, they'd been to Java before, but they had never really understood Wayang. It was all in Javanese. It didn't mean anything to them. It's a dramatic art form, and it's true of most of the gamelan players in this country. Yeah, that they might have been to Java and seen Wayang there, but they have no idea what's going on.
Because of the language.
Because of the language, yeah. It's a different language, and everything is about the plot. It's about moving the plot.
So you made it possible for people outside, or in Europe especially, for them to be able to understand what Wayang, what.
Yeah, there are other people as well. There aren't a lot of us. There are not a huge number of us who can perform Wayang in English. But it's a great pleasure to be able to do this, and not to work. There are people who work with translators, for example. Yeah, but you're always a step behind. You don't have the direct immediacy of a performance where the performer is reacting to the audience and breathing with the audience, the laughs, the rhythm of the flow. Yeah, and Wayang is very much like that because everything is improvised. The stories are set only in the skeletal sets. The dialogue is always being extemporized in performance.